If you've ever searched for weight loss advice, you've probably come across endless tips and plans for what to eat, how to exercise, and ways to track your progress. But there's something almost no one seems to talk about. The first step you need to take before any of that can work: making sure you're emotionally ready for weight loss. In this video, I'm going to share my personal story and explain why healing your relationship with food and your body is the crucial first step. Like many Americans, my struggles with weight started early. Growing up, I watched my mother and grandmother battle with obesity and the health complications that came with it. My grandmother weighed over 350 pounds for most of my life, even after bariatric surgery, and my mother's own efforts to manage her weight led to a series of diets that ultimately failed. I grew up knowing that weight and food were central issues in my family. In my early years, we ate fairly healthy meals made from scratch. My parents made sure there were always vegetables on the table. But as I reached adolescence, things shifted. Fast food and dinners out became more frequent, and ultra-processed foods like Pop-Tarts, ramen, and Hamburger Helper dominated the kitchen. I became aware that I was larger than most of the other girls around age 9 or 10, and I had grown into a size 13 by junior high. Growing up in the late 90s and early 2000s, when thin was very in, probably didn't help my self-image. Cutting out sugary drinks and red meat in high school and eating more on my own than with my family helped me lose 30 pounds without even trying. But shortly after graduation, the weight began to creep on, and on, and on. As my weight increased, so did my awareness of the body positivity movement. I embraced the idea that all bodies were beautiful and capable of more than I realized. I liked a community that pushed back against the ever-present pressure to get and stay thin, and I absorbed messages that told me it was impossible to lose weight and keep it off. But over time, the good messages of body positivity seemed to get lost in a sea of judgment, negativity, and even anti-science. That's when I found body neutrality. This concept gave me the space to accept my body without placing value on it, positive or negative. It allowed me to step away from the pressure of having to love or hate my body. My body didn't need to be a temple, and it didn't need to be a slag heap. It could be just a vessel, one that I needed to maintain with self-compassion and an attitude toward health. Because I had finally come to understand that I had a disordered relationship not only to food, but also to my own body. For years, I struggled with binge eating, periods of restrictive eating, and orthorexic behaviors. And if you don't know what orthorexia is, it's an unhealthy obsession with eating in a healthy way. The truth is that eventually I just got tired. Obsessing over what I ate and my body was stressful and exhausting, and I knew I needed to stop. So I decided to try an experiment, a diet detox. I gave myself permission to eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted. There were no restrictions, no good or bad foods. During this phase, my weight actually stayed stable. The real change happened in my mind. The guilt and shame I'd attached to eating began to fade. Mentally, it took me years to break free from the judgment I'd placed on myself and my food choices, but it wasn't until I decided to let go of all food rules that I truly began to heal. When I was sent to the emergency room for dangerously high blood pressure last year, I decided to turn my attention back to my physical health in a meaningful way. None of the doctors I saw mentioned my weight at all, but I didn't want to ignore the health risks that I knew were associated with my weight. That was the point I began to seriously consider trying to lose weight, and I started by doing my own research. There are more and better resources out there now, and once I decided to do this thing for real, for the first time in my adult life, after having tried to lose weight multiple times before, I saw actual progress. As of right now, I've lost 10 pounds, and I could only do that because I had healed my relationship with food enough to approach weight loss from a place of self-care, not punishment. I wasn't ready for weight loss until I had done the emotional work to heal, and I believe that's true for many people. Before diving into calories, macros, or exercise plans, you need to make sure your mind is in the right place. Otherwise, the same patterns of guilt, restriction, and binging will keep repeating themselves. This might be one of the hardest things you can hear, especially if you feel like you should be losing weight or if you've been struggling with your weight for years. I know it would have been hard for me to accept at one point, but looking back, I realized how true it was. You might not be ready for weight loss yet, and that's okay. For years, I wasn't emotionally or mentally ready to lose weight, even though I desperately wanted to. Many of us have a complicated relationship with food, dieting, and our bodies. If tracking what you eat, trying to restrict certain foods, or even thinking about losing weight triggers feelings of guilt, shame, or anxiety, you might not be in the right emotional place to start trying to lose weight just yet. And that's important to recognize because if you're not emotionally ready, any attempt at weight loss is likely to be short-lived and could potentially be harmful. I know it's frustrating. I've been there. For me, even keeping a food tracking journal was triggering. It was impossible for me to track what I ate without judging myself, punishing myself with negative self-talk, or engaging in restrictive eating behaviors, all of which ultimately led to depressive episodes. And as far as actually dieting, I'd swing between restricting and binging, feeling good when I could stick to my diet for a few days, then spiraling when I inevitably broke the rules I'd set for myself. And it was that cycle of guilt and shame that I needed to heal first before I could ever successfully lose weight. Maybe this is already sounding all too familiar to you, but if you're not sure whether you're emotionally ready to lose weight, here are some signs that you might need to pause and focus on healing your relationship with food and your body first. 1. You feel guilt or shame around eating. If eating certain foods makes you feel bad about yourself, or if you find yourself obsessing over what you should or shouldn't eat, this is a sign that your relationship with food may need healing. Weight loss shouldn't be about punishment or guilt, but about self-care. 2. You label foods as good or bad. If your thoughts about food are dominated by strict categories, where some foods are off limits and others are allowed, it's easy to fall into a restrictive mindset that isn't sustainable. This kind of thinking can set you up for cycles of restriction and binging. 3. Tracking your food or calories feels overwhelming. If the idea of tracking what you eat stresses you out or triggers feelings of anxiety or self-judgment, it might not be the right time for that level of structure. Sometimes tracking before healing your relationship with food can bring back old patterns of restriction or unhealthy control. 4. You use food as a primary way to cope with emotions. If you often turn to food to handle stress, boredom, or emotional pain, you might not be ready to focus on weight loss just yet. Emotional eating is a powerful habit, and it's important to find healthier ways to deal with those feelings before tackling weight loss goals. 5. You feel pressure to lose weight for external reasons. Whether it's pressure from family, friends, or society, if your main motivation for losing weight comes from outside sources, it can make the process harder. True lasting change needs to come from a place of personal motivation and self-care, not from a desire to meet others' expectations. If any of these sound familiar, it might be time to take a step back and focus on healing first. That's exactly what I had to do, and it made all the difference. For some, the relationship to food, eating, or their body may be disordered enough that going on a diet detox may not even be the appropriate first step. The National Eating Disorders Association estimates that nearly 10% of Americans will have an eating disorder in their lifetime. It's much more common than most of us realize. Eating disorders such as anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder are serious and can be fatal. And people with higher body weights are actually twice as likely to engage in disordered eating behaviors as people who are at normal weights, but are diagnosed only half as frequently. If you are experiencing symptoms of an eating disorder, if thoughts of food and eating are obsessive and interfering with working or social relationships, if you are very restrictive or regimented about the way you eat, if you can't seem to control how much you eat, if you are gaining or losing a lot of weight without trying to, if you regularly binge or purge or cycle between the two, exercise or fast obsessively, experience social withdrawal due to food or body image concerns, experience anxiety around mealtimes, avoid eating in front of others, or have persistent and extreme negative body image such as feelings of disgust, I encourage you to contact a therapist or doctor specializing in eating disorders. People with eating disorders may require intense, structured therapy to help heal their relationship with food and their body. The diet detox itself is simple, although it may not always be easy as you adjust to the idea of treating food and eating neutrally. To do a diet detox successfully, you only need to do 3 things, and all of them involve practicing just one skill: mindfulness. I'm not going to go into depth on what mindfulness is here, but essentially, you will need to learn to pay attention to what you do and how you feel. You can implement these 3 steps in any order, or you can start them all at once. But because I believe in the power and sustainability of doing things one at a time, I'll tell you how I would go about it. Step 1, unfollow triggering content, and if it helps, follow better content creators. What triggering content is for you might be different than it was for me. How I define it is essentially any content that gave rise to negative emotions in me, especially about my body or my eating habits. For me, that meant most social media accounts that involved content about diet, nutrition, or bodies at all, including body positivity accounts. I continued to follow a very few accounts that emphasized fitness in a balanced and healthy way, or that I found genuinely inspiring. I also continued to follow all of the cooking and baking content creators I wanted, so long as I didn't experience negative emotions when seeing their content. I unfollowed any accounts that encouraged me to make excuses for myself or my body. Step 2, practice eating without judgment. In particular, this means noticing when you are using words to describe your food, such as good or bad, clean or dirty, even healthy or unhealthy. Nutritious is probably a better word for what you mean when you say healthy. Eliminate the word should from your internal vocabulary. Honor your cravings and refrain from self-judgment. I did this through positive self-talk. Anytime I caught myself having a negative thought about myself or about the food I was eating, I would remind myself that it was just food. Even if I wasn't making the most nutritious choice in that moment, I was fueling my body. Now, this doesn't mean that I always ate ultra-processed junk food. I didn't. I read nutrition labels and chose foods with specific health goals in mind at times, but I gradually shifted from thinking, this is a bad food and I'm bad if I eat it, to I don't want to eat this much sugar because I know it's not great for my health. Likewise, I still planned my meals during this time, mostly to make dinner easier during the week, but I didn't restrict myself based on what I thought I should eat. Step 3, eat mindfully. This just means paying attention to how you feel physically when you're eating. I put this step third because for me, it was easy to trigger a lot of negative feelings if I felt myself eating past the point of comfortable fullness, which is a habit I had gotten into over the years. I needed to be well on my way of healing my relationship with my body before I could start really thinking about how I felt when I ate. Because what you want to really do in this step is simply observe how you feel. Do you regularly eat past the point of comfortable fullness? Are you able to sit with the feeling of hunger at all? Or do you regularly wait until you are starving before you eat? Noticing these patterns in yourself without judgment and understanding what both full and hungry feel like to you will help you immensely if you want to start actually planning and tracking how much you eat. This is also a good time to notice how much you like what you eat. Maybe there's something you eat a lot of that actually you don't really love. Maybe you think you should be eating it, or maybe it's just convenient. Either way, part of creating a diet that you can successfully manage is knowing what you actually like and dislike. How long you need to detox from dieting will depend on how you feel, how quickly your thought patterns change, and maybe even how much work you put into it. I know that it took me about 5 to 7 years before I really started eating without judgment on a regular basis. And I'm not perfect about it today, but I can tell how different my mindset is around food and even my body compared to 10 years ago. It may be helpful to read or listen to affirming words from others, to practice good self-care in other ways, and to continue to remove unhealthy influences and relationships from your life. What I can tell you is that when you think you're ready to add more structure to your eating habits, the best way to tell if you're ready is to see how it makes you feel. You might start by tracking your food. This is what I started with myself because at some point I realized I had no idea what I actually ate in an average week, and I was genuinely curious. If you find that you can write down what you eat in a day without negative self-talk or judgment, you might be ready for more. If anything I've talked about today resonates with you, if you find yourself struggling with guilt around food, feeling pressured to lose weight, or trapped in cycles of restriction and binging, I encourage you to take a pause. Healing your relationship with food and your body is the foundation of lasting, healthy change. There's no rush, and actually, the diet detox I did is only one way to start. Remember, everyone is different, and what worked for me may not work for you. Regardless of how long it takes you or what method you choose, what matters most is that you're doing what's right for you, and it starts with healing. When you feel ready to start incorporating more structure, like tracking what you eat or setting fitness goals, it'll come from a place of self-care, not stress, anxiety, or self-punishment. And that's when you'll be in the best possible place to be successful and make lasting progress. Thanks for watching. I hope you feel encouraged, and I hope you feel confident to take the time you need to get ready for weight loss in a way that works for you.